Well, hello everybody out there and welcome to another random video or random rant, whatever you might call it. And in today's video, I want to talk about Henry Scragg and why you shouldn't blindly trust him. There are probably a lot of people watching this video right now thinking, who is Henry Scragg and why are you talking about him? Well, Henry Scragg is the owner of a curiosity shop in the UK called Curiosities from the Fifth Corner. And the thing that he and his curiosity shop are mostly known for is the sale of human remains. Now, I know this is already kind of like a touchy subject, and it's something that is rubbing people the wrong way. But I do have to say, I don't really have a problem with the fact that he is selling human remains if they are ethically sourced. And this is exactly where the problem is. This is already where the problem begins. Because I really have some serious doubts that all those human remains were really ethically sourced. Because there are just way too many things that are very suspicious and just don't really seem plausible. And those are the things that I want to talk about in this video. Now, the first thing is, at least to my knowledge, Henry Scragg never really officially said that all those human remains are ethically sourced. You know, people just kind of assume that they are. You see, the thing is this. You might think that he actually said it, but he never really did. So for example, there is this one video on YouTube about, I think it was called How to Get Rich. And in this video, there is this question, is this legal? And Henry Scragg says, well, you can sell many things as long as they are not for tissue transplant or as long as they are not illegally obtained. Well, okay, that doesn't really help because pretty much everything would be illegal to sell if it's been illegally obtained at some point. So it's something that doesn't exclusively apply to human remains. Then there are also the FAQs on his website. Again, there is also the question, is this legal? And his answer is pretty similar to the one from this video. So his answer is, yes, it's perfectly legal as long as those things are more than 100 years old, ethically sourced, and of no use for transplant. But the thing is this, it might sound like an answer, but it really isn't because it doesn't really answer any questions whatsoever. Because what he gave us isn't so much an answer, it's more like a description of the circumstances under which it would be legal. But that doesn't really tell us if those circumstances apply to those things that he has in his shop. You know what I mean? So when he says, oh, it's perfectly legal as long as those things are ethically sourced, we still don't know if they are ethically sourced or not. And because we don't know that, we basically also don't know if it's legal. It's kind of like a weird thing. So if I would sell human remains for a living, and if I would have some proof that they have been ethically sourced, and somebody would ask me, is this legal? I would answer, yes, it's legal because they are ethically sourced. I wouldn't say, oh, it's legal as long as they are ethically sourced. What kind of a weird answer is that? Seriously. Or to give you another example, if I would sell food and you would ask me, is this healthy? And I would answer, well, it's healthy as long as there are healthy ingredients inside, you still wouldn't know if there are healthy ingredients inside. So, yeah, his answer to this question, is this legal, is really highly suspicious. And doesn't really make any sense because it doesn't provide any answers whatsoever. And the same thing basically goes for the rest of the FAQs, because there's only one other question, and it's the question, is this disrespectful? And he isn't really giving you a real answer to this question. Instead, he comes up with weird explanations and stuff like that. So he's kind of like he's trying to distract you with other things that we do. So he's trying to make the things that he does look less bad by talking about all the other terrible things that we do, like experimenting cosmetics on animals or farming animals and killing them for consumption and all those kinds of things. And yes, those things aren't nice, and some of those things are definitely wrong, but they are totally unrelated. The things that we do to animals doesn't really has anything to do with the questions how we should treat human remains or how human remains should be treated. It's totally unrelated. And yeah, those FAQs are just so incredibly weird and absolutely useless because they don't really answer any question whatsoever. Not one single question is really being answered in those FAQs. So yeah, what's the point of having FAQs if they don't answer even one question? And basically, when it comes to the question, is this disrespectful? He is just trying to convince you that it isn't disrespectful, or that it isn't more disrespectful than some of the other things that we do. And I would say the entire FAQs are basically aimed towards his critics. People that are criticizing him for the things that he does. But I would say the best thing that he could do against those critics would be to provide some actual proof that those human remains have been ethically sourced. I mean, if he would do that, what else would there be to criticize? I mean, how could you criticize something if it's been ethically sourced? But yeah, he doesn't provide that proof. And yeah, that's kind of a weird and suspicious thing. Not to mention the fact that the entire FAQs are kind of weird. Like, for example, the thing where he says that we should be testing or experimenting cosmetics on life sentences instead of animals, which is like so incredibly wrong on so many levels. I mean, just because it's wrong to experiment cosmetics on animals doesn't mean that it would be right to do the same thing to people. It's just such a weird and bizarre thing. And also when he says that we should kill those people and use their meat to feed the starving and things like that. So basically he wants people that have been sentenced to life to lose all their human rights. And he seems to forget about various different things, like for example the fact that prison isn't just about punishment, it is also about re-socializing people. And then there's also the fact that the system definitely isn't perfect, and that there were always people that were sent to prison or maybe even sentenced to death even though they were innocent. So he seems to forget about that. And then he obviously, very, very obviously, seems to ignore the existence of a parole. The fact that people that were sentenced to death, people that were sentenced to life still have the ability to get out of prison before they die. So only because you were sentenced to life doesn't mean that you have to stay in prison until you die. It basically depends on the crime that you have committed. And yeah, then there is also the fact that crimes or the laws are very different depending on which country you live in. So like, for example, in the US, there is this weird 3 strikes law, which basically means that you can be sent to prison for life even though only because you committed 3 crimes, because each time you commit a crime you get a strike, and after 3 strikes you can be sent to prison for life. And the problem is that it doesn't matter what those 3 crimes were. And there was this one guy who was sent to prison for life because the 3rd crime that he committed was trying to steal a hatchet trimmer. I mean, is that really something that should land you in prison for life? I don't think so. So yeah, it is, the entire FAQs are just really incredibly weird, and yeah, they don't really provide any answers. So that's the first thing that is really highly suspicious. So now let's talk about some of the human remains that he has in his shop, because you do have to remember there are various different kinds of human remains. You know, there are religious artifacts and medical specimens, and then ordinary human remains. So for example, when it comes to medical specimens, I do have to say I don't really know that much about wet specimens, so basically everything that comes in some kind of a jar. But when it comes to dry specimens, you know, things like articulated skeletons or medically prepared human skulls, if you claim that those things were ethically sourced, I would say it is kind of plausible, but not always. Because the thing is this, yes, a lot of those medically prepared human skulls were ethically sourced because they came from people who donated their bodies to medical science. But there is also a large portion of medically prepared skulls that have been unethically sourced, because there have always been cases of grave robbery and body snatching and various different things like that. And we know that at some point India became the largest supplier of human bones, and there have always been criminal activities when it comes to this. And there are various different articles that you can find on the internet about the underground bone trade in India. So yeah, there have always been criminal activities, there have always been skeletons and skulls that have been unethically sourced. And I also don't know how ethical it is if you use unclaimed bodies, because only because somebody didn't really claim a body doesn't really mean that you get to do with this body whatever you want. And then there is also the fact that, especially in poor countries, there are probably a lot of people that didn't claim a body because they couldn't afford a proper burial anyway. So yeah, I don't know how ethical that really is. And yeah, then there is also the fact that the international bone trade in India became illegal in the year 1985 after they caught a dealer with no less than 1,500 child skeletons of unknown provenance. So yeah, maybe kidnapping and murder? Yeah, I don't really know, but it's really highly suspicious. And yeah, like, what I want to say is, when it comes to medically prepared human skulls, it is plausible that many of them have been ethically sourced, but the reality is many of them have also been unethically sourced, but unfortunately it's impossible to know which ones exactly. And yes, I also do have a real medically prepared human skull. And yeah, I also don't know if it's been ethically sourced or not, but there is at least the possibility that it has been ethically sourced. It is actually quite plausible that it has been ethically sourced, especially due to the fact that it is a European skull. So it's not a skull from India or China or something like that. So, yeah, there is a high possibility that it has been ethically sourced, but I still don't know for sure. So, when it comes to medical specimens or medically prepared human skulls, there is always going to be this weird uncertainty. That's just the way it is. But now let's talk about non-medically prepared human skulls. Um, those kinds of skulls were definitely never sold by companies as medical specimens. And they definitely didn't come from people who donated their bodies to medical science. So the question is, if they never donated their bodies, how could their skulls be ethically sourced? It just doesn't really make sense, does it? And the thing is this, when you look at those skulls, you can see that they have been buried at some point, because that's how they got their dark patina and things like that. Because if they would be outside, like in the sunlight, they would look a lot brighter. They would be kind of bleached by the sunlight. But the fact that some of them look pretty dark indicates that they have been buried at some point, which means, okay, somebody probably removed those skulls from the grave. Is that really ethical? I don't really think so. And even if you would say, okay, for example, he said, oh, it's perfectly legal as long as those things are more than 100 years old, for example. Because, he thinks it's okay to sell human remains if they are more than 100 years old, because at this point there are no more living friends or relatives that could get offended by it or disrespected, or who think that it's disrespectful. But the thing is this, only because a skull is 100 years old doesn't mean that it has also been buried for at least 100 years. So in order to know how long the skull has been buried, we would need the full history of the skull. And the history has to begin with the burial and not with the exhumation, So, yeah, even if a skull is 100 years old, it doesn't mean that it has been buried for at least 100 years old, for at least 100 years. There is also the possibility that a skull has been buried like 120 years ago, but then somebody removed this skull like 20 years after this person has been buried. So technically unethically sourced. And yeah, there is also the question, is it okay to sell something now that has been unethically sourced, like, I don't know, a century ago or something like this? Because technically this skull still has been unethically sourced. And just to make things clear, the fact that Henry Scragg probably bought many of those skulls at an auction house or something like this, that isn't the definition of ethically sourced. This basically just means that he legally obtained those skulls, but it doesn't mean that they have been ethically sourced. And in order to know if they have been ethically sourced, we would need detailed informations about the full history of those skulls and informations about the provenance of those skulls. So we have to know how the very first person obtained this skull. And as long as we don't know that, We don't know if they have been ethically sourced or not. And in fact, I contacted Henry Scragg about this. 2 times I wrote him a message via his website, and I also wrote him an email. And I asked him how non-medically prepared human skulls can be ethically sourced. I asked him if he has detailed information about the history or the provenance of those skulls, and if he has some actual proof that those things have been ethically sourced, and how somebody could get this proof. I mean, does somebody has to specifically request this proof, or is this proof provided with the objects that you purchase, or how does that work? I mean, when you look at his website and those human skulls, he basically provides little to no infos about those skulls. And, you know, if somebody wants to purchase a skull, and he only wants to purchase a skull if the skull has been ethically sourced, this person should be able to, or capable of, getting this proof before you actually purchase the skull. But, you know, to me it looks like there isn't such a proof. So the best thing that he can do is to prove that he bought those skulls at an auction house, but that's probably as far as it goes. And yeah, like I said, I contacted Henry Scragg about those questions 2 times, and he never wrote back. Never. And it's been, I don't know, over a month, so he had more than enough time to answer those questions. Those aren't hard questions to answer. So yeah, there is that. And again, when it comes to this thing like, okay, it has to be at least 100 years old, I also don't think that there is some kind of a law that allows you to commit grave robbery if that grave is more than a century old. And even if that kind of a law would exist, it doesn't apply to all countries in the world. And then there is also the fact that only because it's legal doesn't mean that it's moral, because there is still a difference between legality and morality. That is also something that you have to keep in mind. But it does get a little bit weirder, because Henry Scragg is also into crafting. So he is crafting various different things with those human remains, and recently he put 2 wallets up on his website, and both of these wallets were partially made with human leather. And the problem is, he made it very clear in the description that he won't reveal his sources. And the reason why he doesn't want to reveal his sources is like so incredibly bizarre, because he thinks, in his own words, that this is not how business works. Seriously? Dealing with human remains, but then refusing to reveal your sources because you think that that's not how business works? How could this guy ever manage to build up a reputation for being trustworthy? Because so far, there is absolutely nothing that I can see that looks even remotely trustworthy. What is supposed to be trustworthy about Henry Scragg? I don't know it. It's so incredibly weird and so bizarre. And the question is, why doesn't he want to tell you where he got that human leather from? First of all, how should anybody trace those things? Like, how should anybody trace this leather back to where it originally came from if there is now a gap in that path? A gap caused by Henry Scragg not wanting to reveal his sources. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what is he so afraid of? I mean, what is his concern if he would tell you about his sources, where he got that leather from, What exactly is it that he is so concerned of? Is he afraid that other people might also purchase some of this human leather and then make similar products and maybe sell them at a lower price? I mean, if that's his concern, I mean, that would at least explain why he thinks that that's not how business works. But if competition is his biggest concern, I really do have to ask the question, A, how inflated are his prices if he thinks that other people might be able to sell a similar thing at a lower price? And B, how much human leather is there that there is still enough for him and some of his competition? I don't know, it's just so weird and so bizarre. But yeah, not wanting to reveal your sources because he thinks that that's not how business works, yeah, that's like a really weird thing. And it's just like another weird thing amongst all those other things that are very weird and very suspicious. And I do have to say, I'm not a closed-minded person. I would probably like to purchase one or two things from his shop if he could actually prove that those things were ethically sourced. But like I said, to me it looks like he just doesn't have that kind of proof. And yeah, you know, I'm not accusing Henry Scragg of anything. I'm not saying that he is committing grave robbery. You know, I'm not saying that. Even though it is kind of weird that he also has this t-shirt in his web shop of this guy holding a shovel and resting his foot on a human skull on some kind of a graveyard or cemetery or whatever. And above that picture it says archaeologist in quotation marks. Now, I don't know if this is just some kind of a weird morbid humor or if this is kind of like a weird hint, like where he got those skulls from. I don't know, but it's just all so incredibly weird. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy anything from Henry Scragg. I just say that if you want to buy something, please demand proof that those things were ethically sourced. And if he can't deliver that proof, then you shouldn't buy something from him. And yeah, that's all that I'm saying. It's just, he seems to have some kind of a reputation for being trustworthy, but to me, he doesn't look more trustworthy than any other person that is selling human skulls on the internet. Because, yeah, I don't really have any proof that he is trustworthy, and I don't have any proof that those things were ethically sourced. That's basically all that I'm saying. So, yeah, I hope I haven't forgotten anything. I hope this video was informative, and I hope that you think about certain things before you purchase something from Henry Scragg. And maybe somebody, or maybe even Henry Scragg himself, could answer some questions and maybe deliver some proof that those things have been ethically sourced. Because, you know, if he could actually prove that all those things have been ethically sourced, I am actually willing to remove this video. That's all I'm saying. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Check out my channel. I have a lot of other different random videos like mini disc videos, watch reviews, movie reviews, various different things. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next video. Bye.